Carlos Rodriguez's hands are still shaking 3 hours after the incident. Not from fear, from rage. He's watching his phone screen, replaying the video his nephew filmed from the cabin. The Chinese Coast Guard vessel is so close you can see individual crew members laughing as they adjust the water cannon. The impact sounds like a car crash. His fishing net, the one his father hand-stitched in 1989, disintegrates in under 4 seconds. Carlos is 120 miles from his own country's coastline. The Chinese officer shouting through the megaphone is 740 miles from his. Yet somehow, according to Beijing, Carlos is the trespasser. It's April 2012, and in this exact moment, watching his livelihood wash away in a spray of seawater and splintered wood, Carlos makes a decision that will accidentally trigger the biggest geopolitical upset in modern Asian history. He's not leaving. He's not staying quiet. And within 18 months, his refusal to accept humiliation will force his government to make a choice that terrifies the second most powerful nation on Earth. If you think David versus Goliath only works in ancient mythology, you're about to watch it play out in modern Asia, and the implications will reshape how every small nation deals with powerful neighbors. Hit subscribe right now because what comes next proves your geography teacher was completely wrong about how power works in 2025. The tools that won this fight weren't aircraft carriers or nuclear weapons. They were courtrooms, alliances, and something Beijing never saw coming. A population that refused to stay silent. Let's rewind to 2003, when the story looked completely different. China arrives in Manila not with warships but with briefcases. $24 billion in infrastructure promises. Highways, railways, ports that would drag the Philippine economy into the modern era. Teresa Aquino, a 38-year-old businesswoman from Manila, wins a contract to help facilitate a Chinese-funded highway project connecting 3 provinces. She's ecstatic. Her company will coordinate local suppliers, hire Filipino workers, transform rural communities. 2 years later, Teresa watches Chinese construction crews arrive by the hundreds. The workers are Chinese. The engineers are Chinese. The equipment is manufactured in Shenzhen. Her role has been reduced to paperwork, and the promised Filipino jobs never materialized. The Asian Development Bank published a report in 2008 that confirmed what Teresa was seeing on the ground. 73% of jobs created by Chinese infrastructure projects in the Philippines went to imported Chinese labor. The roads were being built, but the economic benefit was flowing straight back to China. Filipino economists started calling it the infrastructure illusion. Beautiful highways that indebted the country while employing foreign workers. But the highways were just the opening move in something much darker. Miguel Santos, a 45-year-old economist at the University of the Philippines, spent 18 months in 2012 analyzing the fine print of Belt and Road loan agreements. What he discovered made him physically ill. The Philippines owed China $8.3 billion at an interest rate of 6.2%. The World Bank was offering comparable loans at 2.1%. Worse, buried in Clause 47 of the Subic Bay Port Development Contract, Miguel found the kicker. If the Philippines defaulted, China would gain a 99-year lease on the strategic naval port. The same port that once housed the U.S. 7th Fleet. A 2013 Johns Hopkins study that Miguel helped publicize revealed that 78% of Chinese infrastructure loans contain these asset seizure clauses. Countries from Sri Lanka to Djibouti were signing away sovereignty without realizing it. Manila was drowning in debt they couldn't repay on terms they never should have accepted. But that wasn't even the real betrayal. April 2012. Scarborough Shoal, a fishing ground 120 miles from the Philippine coast. That's closer than London is to Birmingham. Carlos Rodriguez has fished these waters for 30 years, just like his father before him. On a Tuesday morning, 8 Chinese Coast Guard vessels surround the shoal. They're not military ships, which would be an act of war. They're law enforcement vessels, which gives Beijing plausible deniability. The message is delivered in Mandarin and broken English. These waters belong to China now. Leave immediately. Carlos doesn't leave. He's got 4 kids in school and a mortgage on his boat. This is his livelihood. That's when the water cannons start. Carlos describes it years later in an interview that goes viral across the Philippines. It felt like being inside a car wash made of concrete. The force threw me against the cabin wall. I thought the boat would capsize. The Philippine Coast Guard documented 47 separate water cannon attacks between 2012 and 2014. Fishermen were returning to port with broken bones, destroyed equipment, and mounting rage. Someone records one of these attacks on a mobile phone. The video is shaky, the audio is mostly screaming, but the image is crystal clear. A tiny wooden fishing boat being battered by industrial water cannons from a ship that looks like it belongs in a science fiction film. The video hits Facebook on a Friday afternoon. By Sunday, 20,000 university students are marching through Manila demanding government action. This wasn't happening in some abstract diplomatic channel anymore. Filipinos were watching their countrymen get brutalized in real time, in their own territorial waters. The public rage forced President Benigno Aquino's hand, but what his government did next shocked even the Americans. Instead of military escalation, which would have been suicide against China's navy, the Philippines went legal. In 2013, they filed a 4,000-page case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. The case took 3 years to prepare, cost $30 million, and involved 200 international lawyers assembling evidence that China's 9-line claim had no basis in international maritime law. July 12, 2016. The court rules unanimously in the Philippines' favor. China's claim to 90% of the South China Sea has zero legal foundation. The 9-line, drawn in 1947 and never properly justified, is legally meaningless. It's the most decisive international legal victory a small nation has ever won against a great power in modern history. China's response comes within hours. A foreign ministry spokesperson appears on state television and calls the ruling nothing more than a piece of waste paper. Beijing announces it will ignore the decision completely. Most analysts assumed that was the end of it. China had the military power to enforce their will regardless of what some court in Europe said. But Beijing made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed international law didn't matter in a world where power came from aircraft carriers. They were about to learn why that assumption would cost them an entire region. Right now, as you're watching this, Philippine and American forces are conducting their largest joint military exercise in 40 years. 5,000 troops, advanced fighter jets, amphibious assault drills. This is happening in waters that China claims as their own, and Beijing can't do anything about it except issue angry statements. How did a country with 1/60th of China's military budget force Beijing into this position? If you've ever felt powerless against someone bigger, stronger, and wealthier, this next part will fundamentally change how you understand leverage. Because the Philippines didn't fight back with weapons. They fought back with alliances, and it worked better than anyone predicted. The Philippine government offers the United States access to 5 military bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. This is the first time American forces have had permanent access to Philippine facilities since 1992, when nationalist protests forced the closure of Subic Bay Naval Base. The reversal is stunning. Admiral Roberto Chen, 51 years old, Philippine Navy, suddenly finds himself coordinating operations with the U.S. 7th Fleet. In a 2023 interview, he's blunt about the transformation. In 2012, we had 2 functioning warships. By 2023, we're training alongside aircraft carriers. The capability gap closed faster than anyone thought possible. The numbers tell the story. U.S.-Philippine joint military exercises increased 340% between 2016 and 2024. From 8 annual drills to 35. A RAND Corporation analysis published in 2023 showed that Philippine bases cut potential Chinese response time to a Taiwan scenario by 60%. Manila had just handed Washington the strategic positioning that Pentagon planners had been dreaming about for decades. And Beijing watched it happen in slow motion, unable to stop it without triggering the very military confrontation they wanted to avoid. But America wasn't the only country that wanted in. Japan, still nursing territorial disputes with China over the Senkaku Islands, saw an opportunity. In 2017, Tokyo donated 10 patrol vessels to the Philippine Coast Guard. Not loans, donations. Australia provided advanced radar systems. India began coordinating naval intelligence. By 2023, when Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visited Manila, he pledged $8.7 billion for Philippine infrastructure. No debt traps. No asset seizure clauses. Just straightforward development partnerships. The Center for Strategic and International Studies tracked 127 separate defense and security agreements signed between the Philippines and non-China partners between 2016 and 2023. What Beijing built with artificial islands, Manila built with real friendships. Every aggressive move China made pushed another potential partner into the Philippines' growing coalition. And then the economics shifted in ways that blindsided Chinese strategists who thought money could buy compliance. The Philippines is selecting a provider for national 5G telecommunications infrastructure. China's Huawei submits a bid 40% cheaper than Western competitors. 10 years earlier, this would have been an easy decision. Take the cheaper option, ignore American warnings about security risks, pocket the savings. But 2019 isn't 2009. The Philippine government rejects Huawei and chooses Sweden's Ericsson instead, despite the higher cost. The message is unmistakable. Trustworthiness now matters more than price. Antonio Cruz, a 44-year-old property developer in Manila, had spent 2 years negotiating a partnership with Chinese investors to build a casino resort complex. The financing was locked in, the permits were approved, construction was weeks from starting. In late 2019, Antonio cancels the entire deal and partners with Singaporean investors instead. His explanation in a Business Journal interview is stark. Trust was gone. Every Chinese deal felt like a trap waiting to spring. I couldn't shake the feeling that in 5 years, I'd wake up and discover I'd signed away something I didn't realize I was giving. The data backs up Antonio's gut feeling. Chinese foreign direct investment in the Philippines dropped 67% from its 2016 peak. From $3.2 billion down to $1.1 billion by 2023. During that exact same period, Japanese investment increased 89%. South Korean investment doubled. Even American companies, traditionally cautious about Philippine regulatory complexity, started viewing Manila as a safer bet than anything involving Chinese partnerships. The World Bank published a 2024 report that should have been impossible according to conventional economic wisdom. The Philippines achieved 6.1% GDP growth while actively reducing dependence on the world's second-largest economy. Every economics textbook said you couldn't decouple from China without sacrificing growth. The Philippines just proved the textbooks wrong. You could reduce dependence on an aggressive neighbor if you replaced that relationship with multiple diverse partnerships. The key was refusing to put all your economic eggs in one geopolitical basket. But the most profound shift wasn't happening in government ministries or corporate boardrooms. It was happening in the minds of ordinary Filipinos. A 2023 Pew Research poll showed that 89% of Filipinos opposed Chinese territorial claims. Not 51%, not a slim majority. 89%. This was national consensus at a level that democratic countries rarely achieve on any issue. Filipino musicians released songs about fishermen's rights. Actors spoke out at award ceremonies. Celebrities with millions of social media followers posted videos supporting sovereignty. The Catholic Church, which counts 80% of Filipinos as members, began framing territorial defense as a moral issue. When a cardinal in Manila described the Chinese occupation of Philippine waters as a sin against fishing communities, it wasn't just political rhetoric. It was spiritual authority backing national resistance. And in elections, politicians perceived as soft on China started losing by double-digit margins. This wasn't just foreign policy anymore. It had become core to Philippine identity. The generation growing up during the Scarborough Shoal confrontations didn't remember a time when standing up to China wasn't a defining feature of what it meant to be Filipino. Vietnam watches what the Philippines accomplished and increases military cooperation with Japan to levels that would have been unthinkable 5 years earlier. Indonesia rejects Chinese proposals for joint drilling in contested waters, citing concerns about sovereignty that sound remarkably similar to Philippine arguments. Across ASEAN, the regional bloc of Southeast Asian nations, Chinese infrastructure dependence dropped 34% between 2019 and 2024. Foreign Policy magazine published an analysis in late 2024 titled, "The Philippine Model: How Middle Powers Can Resist Great Power Coercion." The article was translated into Vietnamese, Indonesian, Thai, and Malay within weeks. Every small country watching realized the same truth. You don't need to be bigger than your adversary. You need to be smarter. You need to understand that power in the 21st century comes from alliances, legal legitimacy, and domestic political unity. China had military superiority, economic leverage, and geographic proximity. The Philippines had international law, democratic resilience, and a population that refused to accept humiliation. In the end, the latter proved stronger than the former. Present day. The Philippine president declares strategic autonomy as permanent national policy. The country will cooperate with all partners but be subordinate to none. Carlos Rodriguez, now 62 years old, is back fishing at Scarborough Shoal. Not because China withdrew, they haven't, but because Philippine Coast Guard vessels funded by Japanese aid now patrol the area. Carlos spends his afternoons training younger fishermen, teaching them the routes his father taught him. The knowledge that was nearly lost is being preserved. In 2024, the Philippines held its first joint naval exercise with all 4 Quad nations simultaneously. American, Japanese, Indian, and Australian warships operating together in waters that China claims as sovereign territory. Beijing issued the usual angry statements, but nobody was listening anymore. 0 ASEAN nations currently support Chinese territorial claims as of 2025. The regional consensus has collapsed entirely. China gained 7 artificial islands but lost the trust of an entire region. And trust, once destroyed, takes generations to rebuild if it can be rebuilt at all. Here's the question that actually matters. If the Philippines can defy a superpower and win, which country tries it next? Vietnam has territorial disputes and a population that remembers Chinese invasion. Indonesia has the world's largest Muslim population and no interest in becoming dependent on Beijing. Even Thailand, historically skilled at balancing great powers, is watching this playbook with intense interest. Drop your prediction in the comments below because this pattern is just getting started, and the next country to try the Philippine strategy might surprise everyone. If you want to catch the next geopolitical earthquake before it becomes mainstream news, subscribe right now. We break down the stories that reshape the world while traditional media is still figuring out how to pronounce the place names. The age of automatic deference to great powers is ending. What's replacing it is a world where smart strategy beats raw strength, where alliances matter more than military budgets, and where a country smaller than California can teach the world's second-largest economy a lesson it will never forget. China officially lost the Philippines forever, not in a single dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small miscalculations that revealed the true limits of coercive power in a world that's more connected and more resistant than authoritarians understand.